Hello, welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Oliver Miles, who was former British ambassador to Libya, and he joins us via satellite from Oxford. Ambassador Miles, thank you very much for being on the France 24 interview.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
So in the last few days, things have accelerated in Libya. Did you expect such a scenario?
Well, I can't say exactly that I expected it, but I wasn't taken completely by surprise, because when I was talking to Libyans 2 or 3 days ago, they were saying that they expected one of two scenarios. One would be a very rapid collapse of Gaddafi's authority in Libya, and of course they couldn't tell when that would happen. And the alternative scenario would be a very, very bloody Battle of Tripoli, which, thank God, we seem to have avoided. So the timing we didn't know, but a rapid collapse was not in itself unexpected.
For you, the key to the events is the fact that the security apparatus has apparently, in part, left Gaddafi.
Yes, Gaddafi's control seems to have broken down, and there were some signs of this in advance. We were able to in a sense, to guess what was happening, because, you know, there'd been an additional number of defections of senior people who left Gaddafi, in some cases with their families, and I think that was partly because his system of control was breaking down.
And do you think this is due mainly to the onslaught of NATO, or the rebel actions, or both, or maybe a psychological war that we haven't really been able to see because it's by nature a stealth war?
Well, I think it's both NATO and the Libyans themselves. NATO, the role of NATO, and incidentally, we always refer to NATO, but don't forget that there were Arab air forces and Arab states involved as well. The role of the military from outside was to take away from Gaddafi his decisive military advantage in that he had heavy weaponry. He had tanks and artillery and mortars and rockets and so on, and the rebels did not. And NATO were able to eliminate that advantage pretty well and leave them to fight it out on more or less equal terms. And of course, it took a long time. And eventually it wasn't a fully military victory, it was a political and psychological victory of the rebels. I'm assuming that we really have got a victory, because there are still reports of fighting in Tripoli, and it's not completely over yet, and we don't know where Gaddafi is. But I think it's probably more or less over.
The big question, obviously, is now what? What happens once, if so it happens, the rebels take over Tripoli, the Gaddafi regime falls? There'll be probably lots of happiness, but also fear of the future.
Yes, of course, it's going to be a very difficult task. I'm reasonably optimistic, and the reason for that is that I think that the Transitional National Council, as they call themselves, TNC, we use that in English, the TNC have done quite a good job in Benghazi and the other areas which have been liberated from Gaddafi's rule in the last few months, with one major exception, which was the murder of the military commander, General Abdel Fattah Yunus. But with that exception, they provided a decent level of security, they provided for the welfare of their people, they were able to secure food supplies, water supplies, electricity and so on. A tremendous contrast, by the way, with what happened in Iraq. And people in Libya are always ready to compare what happens there with Iraq. In Iraq, the situation after the military victory of the Allies was desperate. There was no planning, and it was a very long time. Even now, normal services haven't been properly restored. Whereas in Benghazi, that's happened straight away, and perhaps they will succeed also in Tripoli.
Because there are questions about how prepared the rebels are. Obviously, we saw several months ago that they were not militarily prepared. So now, are they prepared to basically rule the country or manage a transition? I mean, did they work on it, or do you think this is going to be sheer improvisation?
Well, they have been working on it, that's for sure. There's been a lot of work put into planning. A committee has been established which already has representatives in Tripoli, or I believe already had representatives in Tripoli before the collapse of Gaddafi's control there. And this committee is charged with the top priority tasks, which are security and water and electricity. A lot of planning has been done. Now, of course, planning is one thing, execution, action is another. And now will be a testing time for them, and it will be very difficult. But I think they're in with a good chance.
One big question that's been asked since the beginning of this war is the possibility of the country falling apart, because we know there are major differences between the East in Benghazi and the West in Tripoli, and also the mountain region. I mean, how will those rebels who come mainly from the East be able to convince the people from the West that there will be an inclusive government? I mean, is this really their main challenge?
Well, it could be a challenge, but I don't think it's the main challenge. I think that one thing we've been hearing from all sides in these last few months is that nobody in Libya wants the country to break up. There isn't any movement for an independent Benghazi or an independent Tripoli. Everybody is trying to continue the unity of the country. That's a bit surprising when you think that the country was only put together by the United Nations as recently as 1947, following the end of the Italian colonial rule and the French in the south, in the Fezzan area. But the fact is that now Libya seems to be a country which its inhabitants want to keep together. So I don't think you're right to point to that as a major difficulty. In addition, although it's true that the eastern area is tribally different from the western area, it's not as clear-cut as that. It's not a country divided into two. If you want to talk about tribes, it's a country divided into many tribes.
Right. But do you think that there is a risk of people taking revenge? 42 years of iron rule by Mr. Gaddafi has left a lot of people angry at him, at his lieutenants, at his cronies. I mean, the rebel leaders have already said, we need to show the world that we're not going to be exacting revenge. Please, please don't go on a rampage. Do you think this can be averted?
It won't be easy. At the moment, they seem to have held the position. It seems that Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, for example, and his brother, who's a much less notorious figure, of course, Mohammed Gaddafi, they seem to have been arrested, held as prisoners in a perfectly proper way, so far as one can judge. The big exception to this, as I said, is the killing of the military commander, because one possible explanation of that is that it may have been a revenge killing. And if so, it's a black spot on their record. But if I can make a rather rash generalization, I don't think that Libya's record in the past has been anything like so bloody as Iraq's record. Iraq is a country in which there's been a huge amount of political violence in the past. Libya is not quite like that. The tribal factor in Libya is not so much related to revenge as I think it is in Iraq and some of the other Eastern Arab states.
So you don't expect a widespread vendetta against the faithful of the Gaddafi regime?
No, I don't think I do. I think that they will avoid that. I may be wrong. They've certainly said that they intend to avoid it. I think they will try very hard to do that. They know that that would damage their reputation in the world outside, and they value their reputation in the world outside because they need the world outside to develop their oil and their economy.
Which is a perfect transition to my next question. What should be the role of Western powers in the new Libya? Obviously, they played a key role in ousting Gaddafi, but there are certainly sensitivities about their role. There is oil in Libya, lots of it. And how do you think the West should manage the transition?
I think we've got to be very adroit, if I can use that word. I think the right approach is to say we've achieved what we intended to achieve with the mandate from the United Nations Security Council. We've finished that job. Now it's up to the Libyans to deal with their own affairs. Now, if we do that, I believe the Libyans will certainly turn to their Western friends for advice and help, and we should be ready to offer that. But it's for them to ask. I don't think there should be any suggestion that somehow Libya's problems are going to be solved by NATO. I think that would be quite disastrous. There's one important exception which I would make, which is that we have one task which automatically falls to the international community, and it's this. The United Nations Security Council has frozen Libya's financial assets. It's the cash. There are literally billions of dollars of Libyan money which they cannot draw on now because it's all been frozen. That has got to be unfrozen, and that's not going to be easy. We'll have to go back to the United Nations, I think. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe the only way to deal with this in quick time, and it must be dealt with in quick time, is to go right back to the Security Council and to persuade the Russians and the Chinese to accept that the time has come to unfreeze those assets.
Right. And do you see any role for the United Nations in Libya, in not only assistance and so on, but maybe presence on the ground? Or do you think Libya should really be left to Libyans alone?
I see no reason for it at the moment. I wouldn't rule it out for the future. If things take a much worse turn than I'm expecting, then no doubt there could be a call for UN intervention of some kind or another. But right now I see no reason for it. I think the Libyans should sort out their own problems. I believe they probably can.
Okay, Ambassador Miles, thank you very much for being on the France 24 interview from Oxford in the United Kingdom, and thank you all for watching it. Stay tuned here for more news on France 24.